Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Jeff Yan. In this episode, you'll hear part one of my conversation with Peter McLellan from Oxford College of Emory University. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. Today we have Peter McLellan from Oxford College at Emory University joining us. And Peter is the educational analyst at Oxford. And he has previously was at Drew University, when we will talk a little bit about that. And today I've invited him because he has been instrumental in some of the successes at both universities that I've worked with him, and he has some fantastic ideas, extremely creative, open-minded, out of the box, and at times I would even say whimsical in the way that he approaches working with students, faculty, and at his various roles at different colleges. So, Peter, welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to see you.
Did you like that whimsical part? Because I really feel
did.
that way. Yeah, you come up with some pretty wild ideas, and I'm sure that they're deeply appreciated. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about Oxford College of Emory University? Because it's one of the colleges at Emory, but it's also kind of sort of a special college.
Yeah, it's a unique place. It's really it is a special place. Oxford is a 2-year college, and a vast majority of our students, like I don't know, we'll just say 99%, go on to finish their 4-year degree at Emory College in Atlanta. So they get their associate's degree, and then just kind of and move on. Oxford is unique in that it provides a little bit more of a liberal arts kind of focus before they go on to their time at Emory College, which is often a little bit more tracked in their approach to education. And so there's something that students at Oxford get that other places or that other places at Emory might not offer. We also are a majority non-white institution as well. Historically, Oxford has kind of provided a space for students who are under-resourced going into college before they went on to Emory College. But that's changed a little bit over the years. But still, our median income of our student body is lower than our counterparts in Atlanta. So it's a really great place. Our faculty, they teach a 3-3, so it's mainly a teaching focused institution, but it's residential and real strong sense of community.
It's really fantastic. In fact, I think that there are, for many of the universities out there that are trying to bridge the gap between providing equity and accessibility to students from all different backgrounds. Uh, Something like Oxford College could be the model for them, really. And many universities, actually most universities don't have that, especially universities like Emory. You either have to have the ability to get in as a first year students through admissions, and that's kind of your only path. And if you miss that boat because your high school experience did not afford you the SAT preps, did not afford you the correct counseling, and you kind of missed the boat, and that's it.
Yeah, it's a really exciting place to work, and students. We have a lot of our faculty have opportunities for research with students, and so our students get this real sort of like hands-on relational sort of experiences with our faculty members. And in fact, one of our faculty, Sarah Fankhauser, is the director of the what is it? I think it's the Journal for Emerging Investigators, where even young people before college have a chance to work with researchers as well. So
That's really awesome.
really a cool place to be.
Yeah. Well, I really applaud Emory University for for structuring it like this, because this has been a while. I mean, this is not new.
Yeah.
So it's really fantastic. So now you were previously at Drew
Mhm.
University, and was that where you started your ePortfolio sort of journey?
Yeah. I know we've talked about this before, but so I got my PhD in biblical studies at Drew, and while I was there, I kind of discovered that I was interested in sort of like bigger picture questions, and
Hold on, biblical studies wasn't big enough. You have to
yeah,
get
no,
the
it's not big
ePortfolio.
enough. No. Right, yeah. But it's like so my work was pretty interdisciplinary, and also, I mean, you use the word whimsy. Yeah, we'll go with that. But I got into questions of like spirits and ghosts and haunting, and there's some great theoretical work out there about ghosts that I have um, that I really gravitated towards. There's a whole world of thinking called hauntology, so not ontology, but
Uh-huh.
hauntology for
Uh-huh.
those philosophers out there. Um, but it's the questions about like how do people that we don't see or people from the past kind of impact us in the present and make demands on us, oftentimes demands for justice to create a better future. And so in the world of biblical studies, that kind of looked like for me, I was thinking about gentrification. And so, I grew up in upper middle class suburbia in the St. Paul suburbs. When I was in New Jersey, is the same situation, and now I'm here in Atlanta, and we have a young child, and we moved to where the good schools were. And so it's kind of the same sort of thing where you look at the world around you when you're in these situations of like material privilege, and you just don't see difference. I think Minnesota and New Jersey, perhaps ironically, always felt like the more segregated spaces to me, even more so than the Atlanta area where I am now. Sort of historically segregated space. Gentrification kind of creates those spaces of segregation. So there's questions of haunting, people and voices and communities kind of making demands from without, those people that you don't
Mhm.
see. Haunting became a really rich vein for me. And I thought about that in terms of scripture at Drew. So like, there's like, you have sacred texts and questions of justice kind of coming from without, and then also from within on the text. And so it's kind of a fun way for me to play around. But while I was there, I I mean, I always knew that I was interested in teaching, but kind of alongside those academic questions, I was teaching at Drew, at Seton Hall, and and found that the conversations I enjoyed the most weren't necessarily like those questions about like, well, how do I teach text X, Y, and Z in the classroom, but more like how do people learn? What are the programmatic questions that we can think about? Um, that help students learn better, help teachers teach better. And I talked with my dissertation advisor about that partway through, and we started talking a little bit about what a career path would look like. That wasn't a professor, because professors, our faculty are stretched thin, everywhere, and you don't have the time to think about that stuff. And she was, I guess, case in point, she was a dissertation advisor, a professor, and our dean. So she's so she they had been talking about e-portfolios as a thing, and she kind of tapped me to lead the project on that.
Mhm.
And I found that you know just as much, perhaps even more so than like sacred texts are a space where people have like exercise their agency in a space and make their voices heard. E-portfolios are literally where that's happening,
Mhm.
because students have a self-owned platform, where they can author their own story if it's done well, and so it just kind of took off from there, and had the opportunity to go to Oxford
Yeah.
after my PhD there. It's really fun.
Well, I'm not surprised that your dean tapped you for it. I love the way you think, and I'm sure that she did as well. Um, I knew nothing about hauntology, but when you first explained it, I was starting to think. Hold on a second. Does this include Bigfoot and
Yeah, right.
vampires in it. But it sounds like actually it's a very narrow definition. It's, these are people that historically exist.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's in fact it was a I remember it was a question in my dissertation defense from one of the people on my committee, and they said so it was towards the end, and these dissertation defenses, like, everybody kind of knows once you get to that point that you're going to pass. So
Hmm.
they were running out of things to talk about, and they just said, so do you believe in ghosts?
Yeah.
Like that was the question at the defense, which is like probably the hardest question to answer. In some ways it was relevant, in some ways it wasn't, but you know it also, like, it's something, haunting, magic, whatever. It does kind of help us, I think, in all sorts of academic circles, to like break that sort of cold scientific approach that we
Yeah.
have to analyzing situations, and allowing us to think about the stuff that people produce as like infused
Yeah.
with their beliefs and desires is pretty exciting, to
I
me.
think I really, this is one of the reasons that I feel like you have had so much success
Mm.
is it's the, you have, I think you're very intelligent, and you you have just a very special way of looking at the world, but you also bring in, honestly, just a very good dose of fun, to the work. So I could imagine your faculty and your students are, they just genuinely enjoy that.
I hope so. We run a thing called, or we're implementing a program called the milestone, which is kind of where our students, obviously they can't capstone their experience because it's only part way through, so we call it a milestone, and
Hmm.
it's a reflective learning opportunity, and it happens throughout the time. Anyway, they create a portfolio, and the template I had initially created was probably a little bit too fun because it was the template was like a fake partial ePortfolio for Kermit the Frog, and and the I thought it would loosen students up, but I think they didn't take it quite quite as seriously, and
Uh-huh.
eventually had a faculty member explain to me that maybe that wasn't the right way to go.
Yeah.
Just,
Oh, you
make it a little bit
experimented.
more serious. Yeah, that's right. We
Yeah.
experimented, but still find ways with a lot of folks to put memes in there, to
Hmm.
encourage students to also kind of express themselves as
Hmm.
well. So.
Well, that's actually something that's interesting. Student expressing themselves in portfolios, in social media, online identity in general. Um, I do find that there is a certain level of seriousness and professionalism people tend to exhibit more in a portfolio, in comparison to, for example, their Instagram pages and whatnot. Um, there is there is a line that, um, well, it's a big spectrum,
Hmm.
and and I think that there is, I have seen there are some portfolios that are almost too, sort of clinical, and too
Hmm.
sort of like, it almost feels dry. It almost feels
Yeah.
like, hey, hold on a second, how can I actually learn about this person's personality?
Hmm.
As far as the portfolio is concerned, it's like got the perfect everything, but like, where's the humanity in this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's been a struggle. Um, I don't mean to say struggle negatively. I think more
Hmm.
in terms of process, something that
Hmm.
I've been thinking a lot about with when we work with our students and our faculty to help create not just templates but also assignments, that are meaningful. So that's kind of been, for me, that's been my focus lately, is making sure that we have, portfolio assignments that allow students, or communicate to them and make them feel comfortable about making the most genuine product possible.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a difficult thing to do. Thinking about what is genuine and not. I mean, I still don't really know, but um, we actually had, we we worked with, one of our anthropology faculty, Alicia Di Nicola, and, we had her students. They were just doing it was intro to anthropology class, 101 sort of thing, and she was introducing her students to different ways of inquiry,
Mhm.
and methods for anthropology. And so for the last two, linguistics and I think it was semiotics. We actually took a batch of our students' portfolios. And, students had given permission, and the students did something called coding with them, which is a form of analysis, like qualitative
The qualitative,
analysis.
yeah.
And it was interesting because we had them take a look at some of the language that our students were using, because we were concerned, like, how are students responding to our assignments, how are they responding to Oxford in ways that aren't always explicit. So, like, um,
Mm.
they might tell us something about, oh, my experience here was great, but the students were able to pick up some stuff from their fellow students, some terms that ways they were describing Oxford, ways they were describing their peers and the most
Mm.
meaningful kind of experiences on campus. And they weren't, the things that were meaningful weren't always the items that we were assessing for.
Yeah.
We assessed for programmatically, at the institution, and they,
Right.
they valued one another. Some of the ways that they talked about Oxford College versus Emory College, or didn't, like some of the silences that
Right.
only,
So
peers can
what they
pick up.
say and what they also didn't say, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so it's one of the challenges we have now, is like thinking, like, okay, so how can we don't expect students to make all of that explicit, but how can we make them feel as comfortable as possible that they can use the language that they want to use in this sort of
Sure.
cell phone space? And we think, the assignment's like one way to do that. There's cultural ways to do that
Yeah.
too, but I think we're starting with our assignments right now.
But I love that you're talking about this more sort of qualitative way of coding, but also comparing to sort of a lot of the more popular sort of purely outcome based assessment methods today in higher education. This is a I think a much needed um, way to fill a lot of the gaps that currently exist in current assessment methods, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think because students can, even if they don't say it, students can tell us a lot about,
Yeah.
how we're doing.
Right.
When you don't ask them, how are we doing?
Mhm.
Um, you know, th-
Yeah.
People do this all the time. It's how people engage with the world can tell us, about how they feel about it. Whether they're
Right.
surviving or thriving, things like that.
Right. Right. I absolutely agree. I've got to get um, I've got to get Melissa Pete to come on this. She's a good friend of mine, and she'd always talked about something that I love, which she called tacit knowledge.
Mm.
And I think that's she'd always just I love the way she describes it. It's things that you know but you don't know you know,
Yeah.
and and those are sometimes you take it for granted, but they might in fact be your just personal superpowers,
Right.
and actually, I find that it is easiest for someone else to tell you that,
Mm.
right? It's easiest for someone because in my
Yeah.
mind, I've worked with you for a while and I've seen the kind of things that you do and the way you think about things. It's so obvious to me. For example, the kind of like magical power that you bring to it. Now we're bringing in hauntology as well,
Mm.
but it's exactly the kind of things that for especially for students who are a little bit less aware because they hadn't spent as much time thinking about it. Um, they aren't feeling confident about it, and I love this approach that you have, and it feels a lot like just good teaching and learning, really. Right. So I know that you have also been thinking about and actually writing about some ideas on sort of some really important topics today, such as having a pedagogy that is anti-racist, that the pedagogy, an e-portfolio pedagogy that is anti-racist. What does that look like? Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's a really interesting topic, and I really enjoy having read a little bit of your ideas. And don't tell
Sure.
us things that you can't talk about yet because you're to these are some things to be published.
Yeah, there's some stuff in peer review right now.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think so. There's been conversation for a long time about the academy being a white institution. I mean, it's a Western European invention, and we have all sorts of evidence now that across the university, students who are by and large white, um, American, European, wealthier, and second generation or later are achieving by our measures at higher rates in higher education. And so anti-racist pedagogy recognizes that the university is a white invention, that is a white supremacist invention, because white people are succeed, and then black voices, brown voices get drowned out. And so anti-racist pedagogy is interested in exposing those things, and then making a space that is explicitly against racism, is against white supremacy, and that involves agency for all people in the classroom, the ability for students, explicitly students of color, to succeed. And um, you know, we actually started doing some of this work before the pandemic. Our dean of faculty development, Molly McGehee, and my boss, Scott Foster, had started getting us involved in uh, uh, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the term. Universal design for learning. Um, and that spurred a lot of these thoughts for me. So universal design for learning is the idea that when we design our classrooms for those who are most marginalized to succeed, everybody does better. And so we had started kind of thinking in our office about like physical classroom design,
Hmm.
and then when we went virtual, well, we didn't really have physical classrooms, and
Right.
so my brain had a chance to go to other places. And so anyway, so portfolios were a space to think about this. Another one of our faculty had approached me. She was running our pilot of our milestone, and we had just finished assessing some of the students, and noticed that our students of color were receiving um, lower marks on their projects. It's a pass-fail course, but we have an evaluative rubric, and so that also kind of nudged me to start thinking about some of these issues,
Mhm.
and with the suspicion that, I mean, because it was frustrating, because the portfolio project is there particularly for student non-traditional college students, and so you'd hope that they would be doing better, and so we started thinking about like what we were asking students to do, and asking them to make both authentic portfolios and academic portfolios, and we had kind of narrowed our definition of what knowledge could be, and that is perfect example of when the sort of knowledge that is considered good is being produced by the white students. That's a red flag, and is also like just a perfect example of what the academy expects of students and from them, who the academy expects them to be. And it wasn't necessarily our readers who were faculty members who also do the assessment. It was the assignment itself. It was the culture of the campus, the culture of which prides itself on being a sort of open, diverse, safe space. Even a college like Oxford, that is majority non-white,
Mhm.
still has these expectations that are infused in it from centuries of colonialism. And so for me, the portfolio is kind of a place to break this a bit. So the the if we I'm thinking of starting with the students and where their knowledge is produced, and where they produce knowledge, it's kind of as the starting point. I think offers us something a little bit new. So, for example, we had a student who whose portfolio exhibited a lot of sort of knowledge of the world, but the
Mhm.
learning that they demonstrated in the portfolio was from before college. So, they have this narrative about how
Mhm.
I learned all this stuff from my family,
Mhm.
and this is an African American student, and I'm going to Oxford so I can become a doctor. So here's all the stuff that I learned in my past. This is how it's going to help me become a doctor. And there's this gap in there, noticeable, which is 2 years at Oxford where they don't sort of demonstrate how valuable their time at Oxford is. Um, and uh, and so one way we traditionally might assess that would be, oh, well, you didn't show us how your learning at Oxford impacted your growth. Another way to look at that, though, is that this is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, who's in our community and is telling us something about their experience. And so
Mhm.
we can flip our assessment measures, and instead of having them, come from top, a top down approach, we can have them come from the students themselves. So how do the students, through their portfolios, assess our institution? I think the agency that students exhibit in portfolios is itself um, a resource for us to start doing anti-racist pedagogy, because it's just a more democratic way to think about it when we have students kind of owning their own space
Mhm.
and producing knowledge there. So that's kind of where I'm thinking right now as a place to start
Yeah.
with programmatic assessment.
And I really feel like almost like literally the definition of taking from a diverse source.
Hmm.
It's just by pure numbers here, number of faculty versus number of students. You have many more students,
Hmm. Yeah.
and the source is just going to be way richer, way more reflective of our world
Yeah.
when we look at their personal experiences. And
Yeah.
I think I think that's a really really interesting uh, approach. Uh, I must say that when I was a kid, I grew up in Hong Kong, and 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 this was when Hong Kong was still a British colony,
Hmm.
and I actually ended up moving to England, and I went to high school there,
Mm.
and it was the ultimate expectation, and it was drilled into me that it was is my goal to assimilate,
Hmm. Yeah.
the culture, the language, the everything there, and 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 it was as if none of the my previous experience would have, it's almost like it didn't, not only did it not matter, it's inferior, and
Hmm.
therefore why would you do that? Aren't you here to learn the better way of doing
Yeah.
something? um, and and well, I guess this is all the way to like the Great British Empire here, and so,
Yeah.
so there's a very strong feeling that was um, the way to be, and I'm not sure if that's changed that much,
Hmm.
and but 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 I think that one of our colleagues, and whom you know well as well, and Paul Wasco, who's been working with
Yeah.
students, native students in Alaska, and uh, the types of knowledge and experience that they bring to the classroom is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And for us to not not only not acknowledge that, but not you know harness that as being a major learning opportunity for all of us is is really foolish.
Right. Yeah, it's deep knowledge that
Yeah.
that everybody has, and if we are truly, a liberal arts, I mean, we are truly a liberal arts institution, um, and so it's critical for us to try and listen and find as much information and knowledge as we can, and then connect that in as many ways as possible. Like it's like the very definition of the liberal arts, and
Hmm.
and so squashing that out, um, is is just antithetical to who we are
Right.
professionally, and so yeah, yeah.
So how do students today, I think that I also have have heard and seen personally, sort of portfolios that feels like that portfolio has to always be the very almost glamorous part of your life.
Mhm.
The parts where you succeeded, because you're almost scared of exposing yourself, and
Yeah.
do people think of me less because I didn't have these super positive experience throughout. And I think that there are, um, it almost feels like to me that, sometimes we see these amazing portfolios, like the ones I was saying from, from University of Alaska, from some of Paul Wasco and Andre Thorne's, students. Um, like it almost you almost like, oh, that's a very, they're very brave and have a lot of courage to do this, but it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't
Yeah.
even think that. It should just
Yeah.
be, that should they shouldn't have to be so brave to do that,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
I
a
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a sort of like, we have an opportunity, I think, with portfolios, but I think more than that, just with reflective pedagogy,
Mhm.
and of course, portfolios are nothing without the teaching, um, and Paul's good, really good. Paul Wasco is really good with this, with storytelling.
Mhm.
Allowing students to tell their stories and then to see themselves, as kind of narrative creatures who are kind of like thinking about their past and 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 their present and kind of hoping for something in the future. Now, there's an exception to this. We leaned with our early milestone stuff, leaned too heavily into the narrative language, and students were like creating portfolios with themselves as protagonists, basically, which is also not exactly what you want. Because that also doesn't create a space where somebody is feels safe to like talk about negative things and failures. But I think good reflective pedagogy allows people to think about themselves as in process, and so um, and and uh, and so we've started encouraging students to think more creatively about sort of artifacts that they put in portfolios,
Mhm.
and the thing that's helped the most with this is using examples from students and showing them to other students of artifacts like, here is my here is one paper from my writing course, and this is my first draft, and just like putting their first draft or a screenshot of the first draft with their with their professor's comments on it, up there, and then successive drafts, which in terms of design doesn't make for like riveting reading. It's not like a fancy shiny thing to put in your portfolio, and what it does is it shows growth and change, and that to me is what these portfolios are, is somebody who's able to stop, look back at something that was meaningful to them but also wasn't necessarily a success, and put it in their portfolio to kind of create sort of narrative of one's own experience of change.
This concludes part one of our conversation with Peter McLellan from Oxford College of Emory University. To hear part two, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. This episode was produced by Drew Albanesius. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.